A hungry traveling girl begs an old storyteller by a campfire for food, then asks him to tell her about the legendary outlaw Robin Hood. The storyteller mocks the legend, insisting Robin Hood protected no one and that the tales of his heroism and his love for Lady Marian are drunken inventions. He claims the real Robin Hood was a murderous brigand who killed for pleasure, not justice, and that generations of his victims still haunt his memory. The girl asks if Robin Hood ever felt remorse for his crimes. The old man says he suspects the outlaw only ever felt tired. By firelight in the dark, someone recites a final prayer for forgiveness, the speaker's identity still kept hidden from view. An interrogator presses a captured old man to name his family line, testing small details of his story before accepting his answers. The old man, called Little John, confesses to his companion that years ago he killed a farmer named Edward on the road and took his identity. Since no one in the region knew Edward's face, John married the farmer's widow Margaret and has lived as Edward ever since, working the stolen land. A family that once knew the real Edward eventually discovered the deception, seized his farm, took his wife, and nearly killed him. John warns that the family hunting them are strong, descended from Viking blood, and that fighting them will likely mean death for both men. The two outlaws sing and travel together through the wilds, reminiscing over old exploits and swapping half-remembered stories from their long partnership. Robin describes his farm wife Margaret with warmth, comparing her red hair to the setting summer sun, while John listens and reflects on his own family. John suggests there are open lands past the mountains where they could begin again, but the weary old outlaw says he no longer wants a new start, only a right death. At night, armed men storm the farmhouse, shouting for Edward as the household scrambles in panic and a boy named Hendry is sent running for help. Amid the chaos, Edward's wife Margaret embraces him and begs him to watch over their young daughter, little Margaret, as the attack closes in. The surviving family gathers the frightened child, praying together for grace and safety after the violent night that has torn their home apart. Overwhelmed with guilt, a man repeats an apology to someone lost, while a mournful folk song plays over the aftermath of the attack. An elderly patriarch confronts the captured men, declaring that decades ago they murdered his cousin, his sons, and his grandson. As payment in blood, the old lord claims not only the outlaws' lives, but the life of Edward's young daughter as well, sealing their fate. The captors condemn the prisoners as heinous slayers of man, woman, and child, and their tormented cries echo through the night as punishment begins. Badly wounded, and barely conscious, Robin is told by John of a hidden priory led by an ancient prioress said to hold the power to heal. Knowing the family will keep hunting them, John insists they cannot stay, and the two must abandon the wounded men left behind and keep moving. The two outlaws trudge through a late, unseasonal snowfall, taking what comfort they can in the promise that warmer days will soon return. A healer explains to the barely conscious Robin that a man carried him to the Priory of St. Clement 6 days ago, sealing his wounds with fire. Sister Bridget tells her patient his ribs, leg, and abdomen were badly broken, and that this remote priory exists as a place of healing, not a town. Bridget recounts the story of Saul as she treats the delirious patient, who gives his name only as Randolph, hiding his true identity. Once his fever breaks, Bridget apologizes to Randolph for refusing his feverish pleas to be allowed to die, and tells him he must rest and heal. Noting his body covered in old scars, Bridget asks Randolph if he means anyone at the Priory harm or if danger will follow him there, and he insists it will not. Bridget coaxes Randolph through his first unsteady steps since his injuries, guiding him back to his bed, and then out through the door on his own. Now walking again, Randolph meets a reclusive leper living on the Priory's island, who warns him he can farm or trap, but questions whether he can hunt. The leper agrees to let Randolph tend up to 6 traps, so the local game population is not wiped out, and offers him work in the orchard besides. The leper explains that the prioress herself once suffered great sorrow after being widowed young, and that through her pain she found the strength to heal others who come to the island. He tells Randolph a parable the prioress shared, of a tortured philosopher who lost everything, but discovered that his mind and his faith could never be taken from him. Villagers sing a folk song celebrating the arrival of summer as life on the island continues in its slow, sheltered rhythm. The leper returns from the far shore with a silent child in tow, calling out that he has brought someone. The girl says only that her papa is dead. The leper walks Randolph through his orchard of pears, apples, and elderberries, admitting that some at the Priory already suspect what Randolph used to be. Bridget tends to the traumatized new arrival's bloodletting, noting the girl has not spoken, eaten, or slept since arriving, and learns her name is Margaret. Randolph tells Bridget he met the girl's father, a farmer, though he claims not to know how her mother died, and Bridget senses he is lying about the violence the child witnessed. Bridget tells Randolph plainly that he lies very well, and asks whether the traumatized girl actually saw what happened to her family. Randolph asks Bridget to say a prayer for his dead friend Edward, and she leads a passage of scripture promising a place prepared for the faithful in death. In the night, the traumatized little Margaret attacks Randolph with a knife, stabbing him before the household wakes and searches the island for her in a panic. Randolph finds the frightened girl hiding on the island and gently disarms her, asking if the men who hurt her know she is here. He tests whether she trusts him by asking her to say his assumed name, then warns her never to speak of a man called Little John, inventing a superstition to keep the secret buried. The leper tells Randolph the legend of the Priory's ancient grounds, once sacred to Druids and Romans alike, and asks if he believes the island holds real power. Randolph reflects that stories themselves hold power, capable of driving men to terrible acts, and that those acts in turn become stories that outlive the truth. A young man named Arthur arrives wounded and shaken, and over a bowl of herring stew tells the prioress his family farm lies toward Keswick. Randolph asks little Margaret whether she recognizes Arthur from before she came to the Priory, but the frightened child will not answer. Randolph carves a small bow for little Margaret, carefully balancing and thinning the wood so it bends evenly under her grip. Randolph recalls the philosopher Lucretius, and his theory of atoms swerving randomly through the void, the tiny unpredictable shifts that let everything in creation come into being. Randolph, the leper, and little Margaret haul and cut a sapling together, working the wood down for her bow while island life carries on around them. Randolph teaches Arthur to check traps, quietly asking whether his family owns land and how many kin he has left, testing the young man's answers. The leper examines the wound on Arthur's head, asking pointed questions about the weapon and the men who supposedly attacked him on the road. Summoned by Moshe on the prioress's orders, a weakening Randolph is told he has become the most important person in little Margaret's life. The prioress presses Randolph on the legend of Guide of Gisborne, asking whether he really beheaded the man, as the old stories claim. Admits there was a real Guide of Gisborne, but that he only cut off the man's ear rather than beheading him, and that he barely remembers most of his killings. The prioress makes Randolph promise never to reveal his true identity to her, so she can spend her remaining peaceful years not knowing he is Robin Hood. As the household sings a summer song, the leper says goodbye to Sister Bridget, and sets out with Arthur across the water to search the far shore. On the far shore, the leper confronts Arthur directly, revealing he already suspects the young man's real name is Godwin, sent by his family to finish the killing. Godwin admits he has lost count of how many he has killed avenging his family's dead, trapped in an endless cycle of revenge passed down through generations. The leper asks Godwin directly whether he is prepared to be responsible for killing a little girl, and the young man finally answers that he is not. Learning Godwin's mother, aunts, and sisters are still alive, the old outlaw sends him home, warning that returning will end in death, and that this mercy will not be offered twice. Believing the leper had already departed for good, Randolph finally confesses the truth to Bridget, that he is the outlaw Robin Hood and a monster, not the man she thinks he is. In the quiet that follows his confession, Randolph and Bridget come together, the old outlaw finally letting himself be seen and held despite his violent past. Bridget confronts Randolph with her own buried grief, accusing him and his men of burning her husband alive and barring the door as he died inside. She describes searching the ashes of her burned home, afterward, finding her husband curled small in the corner, his body wrapped protectively around their children until the very end. The leper, dying, calls out to Randolph and reveals himself, and Randolph rushes to his old companion's side as his condition worsens. Slipping in and out of delirium, the dying man says the legends of Robin Hood are lies he invented long ago, so that fools would follow him into the dark. Mistaking Randolph for a younger man from his past, the delirious leper promises to rescue him and little Margaret and begs to hear again about his wife. Bridget asks Randolph if he has finally found the right death he set out searching for at the very start of his journey. Randolph tells Bridget he is ready to finish it and that he owes what remains of his life entirely to her care. Bridget admits she has never taken a life before, and Randolph tries to reassure her that ending suffering can be as gentle as pruning a flower. Randolph tells Bridget that just as she heals everyone who comes to this island, he is now asking her to heal him by ending his pain. Sitting beside little Margaret, the dying old outlaw tells her that her father's real name was John, a man he knew for many years before he became her papa. He recalls meeting her father on a bridge, wrestling him into a rushing river below, and afterward calling him Little John because he was small when they met, just like her. He tells her they lived for years as outlaws in the greenwood together, holding feasts and giving silver away, though not quite in the way the old songs claim. He confesses to little Margaret that he and her father stole that silver from bad people first, and makes her promise never to speak her father's true name to anyone. He explains gently that her father was called Little John simply because he was small when they first met, just as she is small now. Randolph guides little Margaret through stringing her finished bow, showing her how to bend the wood against her lead the way she has watched him do. At the window overlooking the water, Randolph walks little Margaret through knocking an arrow, and finding the point where the water meets the sky. He tells her that loosing the arrow will not mean letting go, only choosing to stop holding on, and that he will tell her when the moment comes. Lying still before her, Randolph tells little Margaret to feel her body swaying and find the rhythm of the dance before the arrow can fly true. Little Margaret holds her aim steady on the horizon, drawn fully back, waiting for the old outlaw's final word to loose the arrow.